everyone. It's a pleasure to see you all on today's call. So this is April Meetup. Once again, it's good to have you here. Kindly introduce yourselves in the chat box. Let us know where you're joining us from, as well as your name. All right, so my name is Linda Nsifo, and I am the founder of Women in Research, Monitoring, Evaluation, and Learning, which is basically an online community for women who wish to accelerate their careers in the research, monitoring, evaluation, and learning space. So I will just dive into what our topic for discussion is today, which happens to be on designing a theory of change for projects. And I have the honor of introducing our speaker in the person of Mutsa Chinyamakobvu. I will read out her bio in a bit, so just give me a minute while I access it. All right, so Mutsa Chinyamakobvu is an M&E data specialist, a statistics educator, and a mentor with 10 years of experience. She's the founder of Datalab Africa, an M&E consultancy with a niche service of optimizing data flow and data management as part of monitoring quality data. Quality data secures investment and funding, and the road to quality data is a journey Mutsa takes pride in supporting. Mutsa is a Professors Without Borders educator and a recipient of the prestigious Merrill Center stipend for young and emerging evaluators. Her current research includes human-centered design in M&E capacity building and impact evaluation methodology. Wow, that's a very interesting profile you have there, Mutsa. So without wasting much time, I'd like to invite you to take over from here. Once again, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Linda. And good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everybody who's here. It's lovely to see you all, and thank you for joining this session. I will go straight into it. Thanks for introducing me. I think it would be nice to kick off with check-in activity. So I'm going to share my screen, and the activity requires you to access a URL, and there's a code at the top that will let you into that Menti presentation to answer the question. So I'd love to know from those of you who are here what some challenges you've experienced may be, either around developing a theory of change or using one. I know that sometimes you are in a position where it's thrust upon you and you have to make sense of it. So feel free to respond. Short phrases would be great. I can actually put a link in the chat that might be easier to access.
I've put the link and the code in there, so.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
That's a valid point. Yeah. Interesting, because it's every time you see a theory of change, it's just this diagram and how to get to this place. It's really difficult to know where to start. That is a real challenge.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll leave this here and let's get into it. And maybe even as we carry on, feel free to keep adding your responses. I'll have a look at the slide again at the end of the session. Definition of terms, stakeholder collaboration, interpreting a theory of change. Lots of assumptions. Yes, lots of assumptions. In fact, assumptions is something I deliberately decided not to go too much into today, but we'll touch on it. Thank you. Thank you for these responses. While we are there, I think it would be good to reflect on these as we are going through the presentation. And if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I may come to your answer a little bit later, so I'll stop at specific points to see what questions are in the chat, Linda, if that's okay. If you could keep track of those for me, please. Thank you.
Sure, I will do.
Okay. Just taking a little bit longer to load. Okay. Can you see the slides? Yes. Great. Okay. So as you heard, my name is Mutsa, and I am from Datalab.Africa. We provide M&E services, consulting services, and often in the consulting space, you're required to do kind of bits of work. And so a theory of change is something that I've often had to do, and not always the way I want to do it. And I'll share why as we go through this presentation. What I'll cover for this session is what a theory of change is and why you should do it. I'll also talk about how to design one, and then very importantly, how to test if your theory of change holds. It's really important to know that you've got that alignment from end to end. And then we'll talk a little bit about best practices in terms of how to go about involving your stakeholders, for example, and the benefits of doing a theory of change. This is the definition of a theory of change that I got from the Civicus publication from 2019 that I really love. A theory of change is a comprehensive description and illustration of how and why a desired change is expected to happen in a particular context. So when we're talking about context, that really speaks to, what are you trying to achieve in what area? But I love the use of the words how and why. How is typically the activities, the things that we are doing in our project, and why is the impact that we want to achieve, and that's usually at the end of our theory of change. And so a TOC diagram essentially gives you the scope between your how and your why. Now, why should you do one? A theory of change is a really good way to kick off a project. And ideally, you want to be in a position where you're doing this before the project has started. Unfortunately, that's not always the case that you may find yourself as an evaluator. But it's a great way to essentially facilitate a collective understanding of your vision for that project. Number two, it's a good way to come to an understanding of what the problem is. Often we think we know what it is we're trying to address, but what a theory of change will do is that you really go into granular details about what you're trying to address, and the problem statement itself can shift as time goes on. So you come to understand what that gap is and really what it's going to take to fill that gap. And talking about what it takes to fill the gap, you then come to a place where you can articulate that process in terms of milestones to success. those milestones often follow each other sequentially. So you know that if I can't see a particular outcome at some point, I can track back to figure out, did I skip a step? Is there something that I should have seen before that I maybe didn't see? And so they're also preconditions in a way. And lastly, hello, baby girl. Welcome, Annalie. Thank you. Lastly, final reason you should maybe consider doing a TOC, and this is not an exhaustive list, but it helps to establish your long-term goals. It is a planning tool, and so it does allow your team kind of long-term vision of your goal and how it's going to progress, and enables you to actually think about how you want to measure that progress along the way. As we go through this, I think we'll elaborate on that a little bit more. Now, I've got a very practical example to share with you, and it's not a perfect example, and that's on purpose. I'll go through the pitfalls of it as we go through it. So we're going to work through designing a theory of change together for this particular goal. Equipping 50 women in Kagadi, which is in Uganda, to become early childhood development center business owners. Now, so a lot of the responses around the challenge were, the challenges around the TOC were saying that we don't know where to start. And this is where to start. You start at the end. You start with the end in mind. What is the goal that you want to achieve? And further to that, what is the impact you want to achieve? And when we're talking about impact, we now have the SDGs that do help us frame what we think our impact will be. And if we're talking about equipping women in a rural district to become business owners, we are in a way trying to eradicate poverty. We are trying to improve access to quality education for the children in that area. We may be trying to advocate for gender equality, give people jobs, so job creation, and perhaps even something around sustainable cities and communities if we end up reusing spaces, for example, to host these ECDs. So it could be that in the rural area you can't build necessarily straight away, so you find a hole that's not being used. And how does that create sustainable cities for that area, and how does that improve that community? Now, I've got a long list of SDGs here, and when you are doing this in practice, you don't typically start with a long list. Typically, you have an idea, you're passionate about something, so perhaps you're passionate about education. And so you would start with maybe just one. But as you go through the process of building this theory of change, you'll find different things emanating, and you'll find different ways that you can impact different sectors. Now, having articulated your goal, the next step then is to ask yourself how are we going to achieve this goal? And that how is answered by our outcomes. Outcomes are kind of the long-term results that you will see from your project. And I know it sounds like we're working backwards, and that's intentional. Backward design is a really great way of making sure that you're checking yourself for all the different ways in which you will achieve your ultimate goal. So in terms of our outcomes, some of the long-term results we might want to see in this project could be sustainable employment for women. Perhaps you want to see rural economic development through job creation. We want to see safe places for children to learn and grow, and parents having more time to work, and then baby pay fees. And these are just some of the outcomes. I'm not going to be exhaustive with this example. I'm just going to list a few and kind of thread those back. Now, these would be things that we see in the long term. We cannot see this straight away. We cannot say that we have safe places straight away from equipping 50 women to be ECD owners, for example. So this is what we hope will happen maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years. But there are some results that we know we can see in a shorter term, and those we call our outputs. Now, our outputs do have to be linked to our outcomes. You have to think about each outcome in turn. What do we need to do to achieve sustainable employment, to achieve free time for parents, to achieve safe places for children? And this is where the short term comes in. So if we're equipping 50 women, then we do want to make sure that we've given out 50 certificates on ECD business development. We want also to ensure that perhaps they're trained in personal financial management. If we want these businesses to be sustainable, they need to be able to handle their own finances. So that might be something we are thinking about. Perhaps we want them to, for the business, we want to make sure that we've got curriculum and sensory and motor skill development activity plans so that they have these as resources to bring into their businesses. We may want to develop alongside them enrollment plans and registration procedures. And again, to encourage sustainability of their ECDs. And maybe if we want to train another 50 next year, we now have these as tools that we can keep bringing into this project. And these are short-term results. We can realize these goals in the short term. And remember, we're trying to link these directly to our outcomes. So, with the safe places for children to learn and grow, when you ask yourself, how is that going to happen? It's going to happen if we've got these activity plans, if we've got enrollment plans in place and other things. This is not an exhaustive list again. Always make sure that you're asking yourself, have you put every single step that is necessary to realize the results that you're listing? We can go another step back and now ask ourselves, how are we going to achieve these short-term results? How are we going to get to a place where we have women trained, where we have activity plans, etc.? And this is now the stuff that we do. This is now what our project is about. Every project, we go into projects knowing that what we are is trainers. What we are is we're able to allocate resources or collect resources and allocate them to different areas. And so this is the crux of what we do. Maybe we are going to train these women in ECD, early childhood development, business development, personal financial management, HR policies, growth and sustainability, curriculum design, a whole host of different kinds of trainings that we think are necessary to realize our outputs and our outcomes. We also may want to identify locations for where these ECDs can be hosted. We will need to obtain certifications that allow these women to be legitimate business owners and legitimate teachers in this space. We may need to develop support groups because this is a transformative, a project of a transformative nature. And perhaps we'll need to lobby with school governing bodies. Again, not an exhaustive list, but these are the kinds of things that we would be doing. And at this step, because you're working backwards, you may realize that this is all the stuff that we need to do, but maybe typically we weren't thinking about obtaining certifications. Maybe we weren't thinking about lobbying with the school governing bodies. And so this is how you are now sense checking what it is you want to achieve and whether you have all you need to achieve it. Another step back. For us to do all of these things, we have to have the resources. And that is what we call inputs in our theory of change. Of course, funding is important. Having training partners for all of these programs we want to run. Having the suppliers. Considering where the staff are going to come into this equation. And having parents who are interested in this. And really, this list could grow bigger and bigger, the more people you have in the room, really, this list can go very big. Everybody knows that they want tens and hundreds of resources to get their job done. And ultimately, what you'll have at this stage is a relatively complete theory of change. You've got your inputs that are telling you, that are essentially going to feed into your activities that you're going to do. And you are doing these activities because you want to realize the following outputs. You want to see this in the short term. And if you see this in the short term, hopefully what then happens is this in the long term, your outcomes. And it's so much easier to work on a theory of change backwards than it is to do this from the inputs. If you start at the inputs and you say, okay, well, we've got ABC things, and we do 1, 2, 3 things as activities, you now are trying to curate what can happen based on what you have. And that's not necessarily going to achieve the goal that you have in mind or the vision that you have in mind. And it can really diminish the impact on your beneficiaries if you don't take into account that you have to be intentional about the benefit for them. You have to be intentional about what you expect to change in the society, what you expect to change about their livelihoods, and what all must take place to achieve that. Because perhaps you need support, perhaps you need to partner with other projects, and that's what a theory of change will enable you to do. Now, at this stage, it's important to test your theory of change. And when I say test your theory of change, you have to ask yourself some questions to verify if it holds. If the theory that you've put together about what steps lead to what steps, etc., does that hold? Will you see the changes that you are talking about? The first thing you should ask yourself is whether your goal or your impact statement is clear. Is it singular focused? Does it address the SDGs? And I've got that in there because if we go a step back to the previous slide, I had my goal in terms, it was just a goal. I want to equip 50 women in the rural Kagadi district to become ECD business owners. It's not necessarily an impact statement. Now, if you are the person who's the project lead for this particular initiative, you will know what your desired impact is. Perhaps your desired impact was around quality education. And it's not just about the number 50. It's about, you know, what are you providing in this community in terms of education? And that's what will form your impact statement. But your impact statement can grow as you develop your theory of change. It can also get more succinct. So it's not necessarily going to grow in terms of we want to change the world, but we realize that, oh, if we provide quality education and create jobs, then perhaps we are alleviating poverty. And so you now refine your impact statement to make it clear what it is you are trying to achieve. I would suggest at this stage that really think about something that is clear and succinct and do not overcommit. If your results then do show that there's much more happening, then that's fantastic. But if they don't, then you're not trying to plug gaps that are not within your scope. You're not trying to create sustainable cities and communities when that's not within the scope of creating jobs for ECD teachers, for example. Now, that's just one step, clarifying your goal. Step 2 is reading your theory of change backwards. If you noticed, when we were crafting that particular example, when I talked about the impact statement, I went back and I asked, and before I moved on to the outcomes, I asked, how are we going to achieve that goal? How are we going to achieve the goal of equipping 50 women to become business owners? We are going to do that by creating jobs, by having these safe places for them, for children to learn, by freeing up time for the parents. And then you go a step back again and you say, well, how do we do these things? How do we create jobs? they have to be trained in ECD business development, not just early childhood development, but also the business aspect of that. They have to be able to handle their personal finances. And you ask yourself again, how do we achieve that? And you keep going and you keep going until you get to your inputs. And for each item you have listed, there needs to be something in the next sector, if you will, that answers that how question. They can be overlap. It doesn't necessarily have to be one-to-one. So you can have that, for example, business development, 50 women being trained in ECD business development can be achieved by training in various training programs, can be achieved by making sure they have certifications. There's overlap in the areas. But what you cannot have is that you've listed an outcome or an output that doesn't have that how question answered. Because then you can almost certainly expect to not achieve that particular result. Moving on to our third step for testing our theory of change, ask yourself whether your causal links hold. Is it clear why you are doing the various activities to get from one point to the next? And here we're really going, beyond just outcomes and outputs, but into the activities to say, we want to do these things, but is it clear why we are doing them? Why are we trying to lobby the school governing bodies? Why are we trying to obtain certifications? Check if it's absolutely necessary to do those things. And finally, read your theory of change forwards. And in this step, instead of asking how, you're asking why, like we were doing with the activities and the causal links, but you're doing it right through your theory of change. Why are we plugging in the following inputs? Why are we doing these activities? Why do we want to see these short-term results? Your why question should be answered by each following step. And if your theory of change ticks all 4 of these tests, then you know that you've got a solid plan for achieving the outcomes and the impact that you've set to achieve. Now, of course, things change, and this does have to be a living document. You do have to constantly be measuring whether what you expect to see is what you're seeing. But if you've taken the time to really be intentional and really be thorough about the linkages, then it's easy to track where the gaps are. It's easy to figure out what needs to change in the process if circumstances change. Now, something I didn't mention when we talked about the theory of change was the assumptions. The assumptions are essentially a risk mitigation step. You want to then say, what are we assuming, particularly relating to context, relating to access, relating to equity in the area? What are we assuming about what's already available for us to be able to do this? What are we assuming about the willingness of our beneficiaries to engage with our activities? What are we assuming about the ability to locate a building, for example? What assumptions are we making that we will need to check? So these are not assumptions that you just list and leave in a list. You do need to then go and test your assumptions, collect the data, address whatever needs to be addressed to ensure that your outcomes do then happen because you've checked and tested your assumptions. I won't go into that because it's a whole topic on its own. And it goes a lot into risk mitigation, but it is definitely worth doing. Now, once we've done the theory of change, sometimes it's really difficult to, part of why this is a difficult topic is because there's so many ways to do it. And so you don't really know, have I done it right? Is it going to work? Is it going to be a living document? So I'd like to share some best practices around how to go about it so that it is something that is influential within your project team. First of all, I would suggest that you use a participatory co-creative approach. This means inviting all the relevant stakeholders to the room, as many as you can that are involved with your business, from your beneficiaries to your branding team, to your marketing team. Bring everybody to the table, but be careful that you only bring people to the table who want to be at the table. You don't want people in the room that are just there because it's another work day. And so they have to be present and they have to sound like they're using their brains in that time. And so they contribute results that are completely out of scope, and you have to now address it because it has been contributed. So try and only have people who want to be in the room present, because it really helps to refine your vision. It helps to see what else is involved. It helps to align your stakeholders. So it could be that your marketing team, we're going to put I don't know, women on all of their branding materials in a rural area in Uganda where maybe patriarchy is still the order of the day. And so now you are being disruptive and you have a hard time bringing your project to life, where they really could have put children on their marketing material. And these are the kinds of discussions that will happen in this room when you are putting together this kind of document, and thinking about, well, what is key? What is necessary? What is perhaps not necessary? It's also important to draft the theory of change yourself, particularly because when you have everyone in the room, it really can blow up. And so you have to be the brains to rein in anything that's kind of veering off the course of achieving the particular goal they have set out to achieve. And that's your role as a facilitator when you're designing a theory of change. And finally, I would suggest creating a simple visual. What comes out of this participatory approach is often a very complex set of activities and outcomes, etc. And so you have to know how to categorize, and then also how to display the change story in an aesthetically pleasing way. I have so many suggestions around this, and maybe some other day, Linda will invite me back here, because this again is another very comprehensive aspect, an important aspect, because a lot of people will use this document. If you are working across different regions, you want to be able to get a team in a different country to realize what it is you're talking about and connect with it on an emotive level, and be inspired by it as you were, and follow it as you would want them to. And the simple visual really helps to set that off. And finally, for today, we'll go into the benefits of doing a theory of change, in case they hadn't already come to mind. So we always hear the saying, you know, where there is smoke, there is fire. And I gave you a picture here of pink smoke, because where there's pink smoke, there is a party, not a fire. And that's really what an effective theory of change can do for you. It can be your pink smoke. It can be what really brings your project to life, gives it visibility, gives it momentum, and gives it the impact that you want to see. One of the benefits of doing a theory of change using the best practices we spoke about is having this clarity of vision and alignment within your team. You also will have great buy-in from your stakeholders. If, of course, you only had the interested people in the room, you'll see that this process really inspires your stakeholders, and you know, they go off excited to bring this vision to life and understanding what it is all about. And this inspiration can actually give you some pitch deck content, which is wonderful. If you're a project lead, you may have come in passionate about education, and your pitch deck would have been only about education, and following the design, the participatory design approach, you may now find that I can essentially design a pitch deck around gender equality. I can design a pitch deck around poverty alleviation and speak to funders who are interested in these different SDGs or impact points. And it's a really, really useful tool for that. And that is all I have for you for now. Thank you for your attention. I'd be glad to take any questions you may have and go back in the slides where needed. Thank you.
Wow, that was really insightful. So much depth and yeah, a lot of information to take in. So thank you so much, Mutsa, for giving us at least the fundamentals on how to design a TOC, theory of change. So the floor is open for questions. So if anyone wants to ask a question, please feel free. You can type your questions in the chat window, as well as unmute yourself, and then you can ask Mutsa directly as well. Also, if you have any comments, or if you also want to share your experience when it comes to designing a theory of change for a project that you've done or you're currently doing, please let us know as well. We're here to share and yeah, learn from each other as well. So please don't hold back your valuable information as well. Okay. So maybe I'll just kick off maybe while our participants are thinking about their questions and comments. So from what you've said, what I gather is that a theory of change is not static, it's dynamic. So it can change with time depending on your outcomes or outputs. And one thing I also wanted to say was about how to also like you talked about creating a simple visual so that people can yeah, visually appreciate what you're trying to communicate, like, you know, in a diagram, but also like how to clearly articulate the TOC is also very key, because I believe there are times that you might engage with people who might not necessarily understand or know what a TOC is meant to do or meant for. So when you break it down, it simplifies what you want to achieve, especially if it's in a rural setting. Yeah. So yeah, in line with that, so my question then with creating a simple visual is what kinds of tools have you used or can you recommend that we could use to simplify our, you know, our messaging, like when it comes to explaining a TOC to someone who may not necessarily be like, you know, familiar with yeah, what the TOC is supposed to do.
Sure. So that's a great question. There are many, many tools. We can talk about design tools. So you've got your Canva and anything really that can handle infographics, Visme and picture chart, Figma as well. These are design tools. So you already need to know how to go about with the design. And if you don't, then you can always rope in somebody who is in that field to help design one for you. It's happened before that I've worked with a creative team to develop a theory of change for their work. And, you know, I'm not a designer, so I ended up with a flowchart and a beautiful flowchart. I tried to make it pretty, but they have particular standards around, you know, design. And so they really managed to give it a look and a feel that was particular to them. And then I came back and tested to make sure that how they had interpreted it into the design still held. So that's one way to go about it. But perhaps I could show you some examples of other visuals that I've seen, and I'll just talk about these kind of 1 minute each.
No problem.
Okay, so this is actually from another workshop. But here, let me try and blow this up a little bit. This was a theory of change for an outcome-based program. And when I say outcome-based, I mean the kind of work that they do, you know, they work until they see a particular result. And rehabilitation centers are an example of outcome-based programs. And this is a children's, Fiverr Children's Foundation, where they take vulnerable children and kind of work with them at summer camps until they are adults that are able to be, you know, effective citizens in society, but also making ethical and healthy life choices and engaged and equipped with 21st century skills, etc. All these things that for people who are not in vulnerable societies, it's easy to get to this stage, but they have a series of engagements. And so what they wanted to do was map how they are building education, how they are building a civic mindedness approach, how they are building health and ethics, and along the way, the different camps and mentoring opportunities and workshops that they will have to bring this about. And so at each step, it's about what outcome are we seeing from the activities. And this is one way of developing, of visualizing. Let me skip this slide altogether. Of visualizing a theory of change. And then there's, I'm sorry, this is a whole slideshow. This is another one, which is interesting. It's very different. So it's not outcome based. This is a Japanese organization that essentially wants the elderly in the society to have support by people feeling the need to engage with elderly people as a responsible citizen. And so they map how they approach those who perhaps have an elderly person around them, and how they help them see how to support an elderly person through to making sure that this person is not alone in society at the end of their life. And then there's a different way that they approach those who have no idea of what it's like to be old and needing support. And they go through a different kind of journey to realizing that they can play a part in supporting elderly people, and maybe not as intense as people who would live with elderly citizens, but still they are having particular steps that they are trying to have these people realize. A little bit outcome oriented in that way.
Yeah.
And then one of my favorite examples to share is one that takes away the lingo, the outcomes, what are outcomes, what are outputs, what are activities. Yeah. And this one is developed by a lady named Kat Ho. I think she has a website here, katherineho.com. And it maps in terms of what we call spheres of influence. So the sphere of control would be what you are able to do, the activities that you do, and you know what you're busy with your team. But that brings about some kind of direct influence, and this is the short-term result. Those beneficiaries, what are they going to do in the near term? What is the indirect result of that is what we then map as the longer-term result. And then the sphere of interest is the impact that we want to see, and this is at a global level. And I love this sphere of influence model because it really does probe you to think about what is your interest? What are you trying to see, either globally or you can bring it down to nationally or locally. It's up to you. And then to think about, you know, if we want to see indirect influence, what must happen with our beneficiaries and what must we be doing so that these things can happen. And this is a very fun visual, as you can see.
Yeah.
So it's not a flow chart, but different themes or key focus areas for this organization are represented. It's the USAID. So learning is very big for them. And so you'll see light bulbs everywhere. And
Yeah.
diversity is very big for them. And, you know, there's all kinds of ways to play around with the visuals.
Yeah. Thank you so much for those examples. So there's a question from Kumbi. So she said, thanks for the presentation, Mutsa. I am at odds with the stakeholders I interact with regarding the issue of measuring impact. Everyone desires to make an impact, but nobody desires to do the fundamentals. I point out that impact is a process, not an event. I was just going to inquire a bit about the causal pathway you mentioned. Would you be willing to elaborate on how we might approach this, especially in cases where qualitative indicators are prevalent?
Yeah, gosh, that is a tough one. Thanks, Kobe. Thanks, and hi. Thanks for being here. So you're so right to say that impact is a process, and that's the point of checking for that causality in your journey, in your flow. Where your indicators are not quantitative. So if they're quantitative, it's easy to say, you know, if this happens, then we move to this, and if this happens, then we move to this, and you can measure and see if it didn't happen. But where they are not, that's where we bring in our outcomes focused kind of theory of change, where you want to see a particular behavior showing up, and you have perhaps various activities that are trying to influence that behavior. And it's difficult to measure behavior in short bursts. So you want to map it over a long period of time. What are the various behaviors that you're going to see? And then you look at your list and map them in terms of what comes first. Do we first see a student who is attending all their classes, or do we first see a student who's engaging in extracurriculars? What comes first when that mindset shift is happening for these kinds of qualitative or outcomes, if you will? And it's really important to lean on subject matter experts in those cases, because you don't want to guess about what that linkage is like, and you know, the order in which it happens, so that you know when to plug what intervention or when to plug what activity. I hope that helps to answer your question.
It does. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. I mean, please do add answers if anybody else in the room has experience with that as well.
Sure. So any more questions? We still have some time. I see Annalyn, you want to ask a question or share your experience?
I think that might be Annalyn's little one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just trying to find the YouTube.
Any more questions from anyone, or does anyone want to share? Maybe there's a theory of change task that you've been given, and maybe you're having some challenges. Feel free to share, and I'm sure Mutsa will be willing and happy to help where she can. Okay. So yeah, she's also shared her contact details. And yeah, please do well to visit her website, www.datalab.africa. Personally, I've learned quite a bit from her YouTube page. I'm not done yet, but Mutsa, with your permission, is it okay if I could just drop the link for people to go and have a look at your YouTube
Yes,
channel.
please. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Sure.
That would be great.
Yeah,
Thanks, Linda.
you're welcome. Yeah, so you'll find, basic and very interesting explanations to logic models, results-based management. Yeah, a whole lot of interesting terms that we use a lot in M&E, in research and learning as well. So please do well to have a look at some of the videos that she has there. And yeah, I think in the absence of any questions or comments, Mutsa, would you like to give any final words or maybe comment on the check-in activity we had earlier for those probably who missed? Maybe you have some
Yeah. So
final thoughts.
thanks for bringing me back to it. Yeah, it is it was just a question around the challenges that people might be experiencing. And I remember when I was new, maybe this is the only one that I haven't really addressed. When you're new to M&E, it's scary to delve into these topics. When I looked back, preparing for this workshop, I looked back at my first theory of change and I was embarrassed that I sent that to a client. But thank goodness that we all grow together. So, sometimes you do just have to delve in and trust that you will get better the more of this that you do and practice. And with M&E, really, a lot of what you learn comes from being exposed to different circumstances, different industries, different projects. I don't have a single theory of change that looks like any of the other ones to date. They're all different. So I can't tell you that I'm doing it right. I can only tell you that I'm doing it differently every time. But it is a fun journey to be on, and it's really great. It exposes you also to different industries. I always get inspired about whoever I'm working with, sitting in the room and working on their theory of changes with them. But yeah, I do suggest that I didn't go into things like terms too comprehensively and assumptions too comprehensively. But once you've seen it, when you go back to resources, it now starts to make sense. So do go back and read up on anything that you may have been struggling with, and hopefully it makes a bit more sense. But yeah, thank you for being here, and thank you for having me, Linda. This was really lovely.
Sure, we've also enjoyed having you, and yeah, we look forward to inviting you once again. Since you mentioned a few things that probably need to be expanded on, yeah, as you were presenting. So yeah, we'll definitely be in touch on other topics that will be of interest, and yeah, just hoping that would have more engaging sessions with you.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to it.
Sure. All right. So yeah, let's show our appreciation to Mutsa. Feel free to reach out to her. She's shared her contacts after here. So just by way of announcement, so I've dropped some links in the chat. So the first one being a feedback form. Please provide some feedback on today's session. If you want us to tackle a particular topic or area of interest, please share in the form. And also you can watch previous Women in RML sessions that we've had since we started in January. And then you can also follow our social media pages on Twitter and LinkedIn. And then I will also share a link on some topics. So the topics that you might have in mind, there's a specific document where members can enter those topics. Yeah, so feel free to share as well, and also suggest speakers as well. Okay, so Kumbi also has a comment here. Okay, let me start with Annalyn. So she said, thanks for this presentation, learned a lot here. And then Kumbi said, where there's pink smoke, there's a party. Hopefully, we all will attend that party. Thank you, Mutsa and Alik's great session. And then Linda says, thank you. All right, thank you all. Thank you so much. Let me just wait for a few minutes so you can take your time and access the links or copy them. Yeah, but if you're done, please feel free to hop off. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you all at our next meet up. And yeah, please do well to invite a friend, someone you know who is interested in, learning more about M&E and accelerating their career in M&E. All right, thank you, Mutsa, once again.
Thanks, Linda.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Right. Yes, nice weekend, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Kumbi. Thanks, Jacqueline.